Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My guest today is the nationally syndicated columnist Joyce Hifler. Hi Joyce, thanks for joining us. I should also mention that you're an author of 3 books, Think on These Things, and A Cherokee Feast of Days, Volume 1, and A Cherokee Feast of Days, Volume 2. I've got a friend, Dorothy, and every morning when she wakes up, before she has her coffee, before she kisses her husband, before she turns on the TV, she goes and gets the newspaper and she reads your column. Do you think the fact that you write a daily column involves you more intimately with your readers than if you were doing some other kind of writing?
Oh, sure. I have tried to refine it down to the personal person.
Right.
I speak to myself, so I speak to them. I never write to anyone but me. Emerson said, write to yourself and you write to an eternal audience.
I love that.
I've always remembered that, and as long as I'm working with what I'm thinking about, I'm working with what they're thinking about.
So really, you're not trying in your column to be an advice columnist. There's a great big deal of difference between what you do and what Dear Abby or Dear Ann and this group of people do. Still, do some of your readers look to you for personal advice? I mean, I call you all the time and ask for personal advice about one thing and then the other. That's a little secret we'll let out on the show. But do other people look to you for advice on personal matters?
A lot of times they want to tell me something as much as they want me to tell them something. There are those who think I could teach them something, and the teaching is an inner thing that every person has to find for himself. You can't teach someone else what they need to know. That you need to wake them so they can understand what they need and go look for it.
Do you think your readers might have misconceptions about you? See, before I met you in person, I just assumed that you went around being wise all the time. Not that I found out that you're not wise, but I know that you're human and that you have your concerns just like everyone else. Do you think people too tend to think that about you?
I think so. I had one lady say to me, she was telling me her problems, and she said, but you wouldn't understand that because you're happy. And I said, well, the whole idea is that no one is happy all the time and no one's sad all the time. And no one around you is happy or sad all the time with the way you're producing.
Would you describe yourself as a very serious person? Because in your columns, you're pretty serious. You deal with serious issues. But what about in your personal life?
No. I don't feel serious.
Do you get goofy? Do you have fun? I know that you and Charlie, your husband, like to go out and have your biscuits and gravy. And
you better believe it. Charlie is my best friend, and we have fun together. And he knows that I'm goofy, and that's all that counts.
Not only are you goofy, but you have a dog who sings happy birthday. Is that right?
Yeah, he's Charlie's English setter, and he sings Happy Birthday, and he sings the Star Spangled Banner. And even if he hears it on television, he gets up and sings with it.
So, very talented family then.
Yes, very talented.
But even though you do have fun and you know how to let go and to have those periods of release when you can be, quote, goofy, unquote, writing this column, knowing that people like my friend look to you for that kind of advice, it's got to be a big responsibility for you. You must feel it.
Yes, I do, and I think everyone should realize the terrible responsibility of their words. Words are the containers that we mold our lives in, and people don't realize that when they let all these words roll without realizing what they're doing to themselves and to someone else. These are the shapers, the containers for our lives are our words.
And writing a daily column, too, must involve a lot of discipline. Do you write every day?
I write all the time in my head, and because I'm always searching for that vision I see, I'm always searching for that special time of day, that special lighting, that special sound. These things are important to me. They're background for everything that I do.
I bet sometimes you're like all writers. You have good days behind the typewriter, behind the computer, and bad days. And what do you do when you're having a bad day at the typewriter? Do you ever have writer's block?
No, I don't have writer's block because I can't. I have deadlines. And when you have deadlines, you can't afford writer's block. That's for people that that can quit if they get in a tight spot. I can't.
Well, and actually, isn't your deadline a little different from other deadlines in that you're writing way ahead of schedule, or what we would think? What is your time frame now? This is June right now. What months are you writing for in your column?
Not as far ahead, since I'm doing the syndication right now, as I would be if I were with a organized syndicate, which I used to be. And I had to be 6 weeks ahead.
Is that confusing?
Yes, it is. It shoves you into another time, and you go up there and you do your work, and then you look around to see where you really are, and your body and mind and spirit are back there, but you've been up here working. And it's a matter of projection. You have to readjust and get back into your schedule.
You mentioned the personal aspect of your column, and I know that you've encouraged young writers to even keep journals. Would you say in some regards that your column is like your journal?
Oh yes, it is. Think on These Things was from my journal. That was my first book that I wrote 26 years ago, and it was taken from my daily journals. And I think anyone who wants to know themselves, and they're not going to do anything until they do know themselves, is to keep a daily journal and write in it what you feel and what you think, and over a period of time you find a pattern. And you can make adjustments.
I almost made a Freudian slip a while ago and said, do you think of it as a personal journal, and said journey, but in a way it is a reflection of your personal journey as well, isn't it?
It is, both.
And I wanted to ask you, do you ever worry about repeating yourself? Because how many columns have you written?
10,000.
Oh, 10,000. Can you remember them all, I guess, in order, in chronological order?
No, I don't remember. But I've been writing this column 35 years, and Charlie figured it, and
10,000.
10,000 newspaper columns.
Well, do you worry about repeating yourself and think, have I said this before?
No, because I don't like anything that's in the past.
And you can't keep looking back. And,
yeah.
You know, there's a Greek philosopher who once said that you can't step into the same river twice. And do you agree with that?
Yes, very much so. Even if you're writing about the same subject. You know, I told someone a writer has about 10 subjects, and he approaches it from a different angle every time he uses it. The emotions, the human emotions, are pretty common if you stop and think about it. But look how many ways we approach them. We approach it with happiness, with sadness, with tears, with laughter, with so many different emotions.
Right.
And I keep a calendar on my desk, and every time I write release columns, I write what they were about. And that way I don't go back, and because you can get your mind on one subject and sort of get stall out on it.
Sure.
And I try not to do that.
You mentioned talking about your personal problems, not your personal problems, but your personal perspective, or using your personal perspective in the column. What about the people close to you? If they're having challenges or problems, do they sometimes work their way into your column? I'm thinking about that story I told you about my little credit card situation. We won't go into that. There's no danger that that's going to wind up in your column, is it?
No, no. I wouldn't even remember it. I don't. When I sit down to write, it's like some days when I feel stressed about what I'm in the middle of, in my mind, I go out under a tree. I go outside, and sometimes literally. I go to my garden. I'll go there, and I can actually feel the stress draining away and the ease start coming in.
You had a unique experience with your first book, which was a collection of your columns, Think on These Things, and you said that was 26 years ago that first came out. It was a big success, and then it was brought back, and tell us why Think on These Things was republished.
It came, the second day on the market, when it first came out, it sold 30,000 copies. and it stayed on the market 14 years, and Doubleday published it first. And when they sold out to Bertelsmann, which is a German publisher, well, they wiped out all their old titles. And people wanted copies of it, and they started advertising in national magazines to try to find it. And there were none. There were none. And so when I went to work for Council Oak, they decided they would go ahead and republish it, except they were going to do one printing, and I don't know how many times they've been back to press for extra copies.
There's quite a time span in between then the first edition and then the second and
Right.
subsequent editions.
Right.
And I just wondered if when you went back and reread some of those other columns, you thought to yourself, did I really write that? Because I know when I go back and reread things that I wrote maybe a few years ago, I think, I've changed since then. And I
Yes.
wondered, did you have any of that kind of experience?
Well, I did, but still, if you're working with central ideas and you're working with truth, it can't change. The basic part of it truth can't change. Truth is truth at every point. And you can't change it, but the circumstances around it change. So you adjust. And even when we came out with this again, I rewrote the foreword, and we updated a little bit of the wording throughout the book because it had been a few years, and things are said differently now than they were. But it didn't change the meaning at all.
And obviously the appeal of it. Joyce, do you take your own advice? Because you give such wonderful advice in your columns. And you know, one of the things that I was enjoying and reading in Cherokee Feast of Days just recently was about we mustn't let our fear of making a mistake keep us from living up to our potential. And I wonder, do you take that advice to heart, and do you try to live your columns after they're written?
Oh, sure. You know, I couldn't write them if I didn't believe it, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to work as hard as everybody else does to stay on the right path and do the right things. I am very much aware that Charlie is, he's a stabilizing factor for me. He's like having a ground wire. You know, he keeps me solid because he's the common sense person. I'm the creative person. And consequently, we fit hand in glove on working something this way. I can do columns and bring them down to him to read. See, he edits all of it.
Oh, well, that makes a nice
And
relation.
he, back upstairs, you've got 2 ideas here, you've got a wrong word, you've made, and I'm glad, because see, he has the eye for that.
And it never causes any problems.
Oh yeah, I don't like to go back upstairs.
But you do, and you've worked all that
sure.
out, and it's turned out to be. Joyce, I want us to visit some more. We're going to take a short break, when we'll be back with more with Joyce Hifler.
This is an RSU-TV encore presentation of Writing Out Loud.
Hello, I'm Teresa Miller, and welcome back to Writing Out Loud. I'm visiting with Joyce Hifler, the author of A Cherokee Feast of Days. Joyce, I learned something interesting about you fairly recently, that you paint.
Yes, I do.
Is that connected to your writing? Does it help you write?
Yes, color is very important to me, and I love to paint. It's like pulling the plug on stress for me to paint. I work with color in my books, in my writing, in my newspaper column. When I feel like I'm really uptight, I can step away and see color and work with color, and it releases me. It's like I'm home. And the same thing when I'm painting. I love to paint. I've tried watercolors and other things, but I really love oil painting because it's so fluid and it moves sort of like words. You know, you
That's
can.
a good connection there, good comparison. Do you have a lot of nature themes in your writing? What about in your painting? Are there a lot of nature themes?
Mostly, yes.
And I couldn't help but wonder, as I read through your book again last night, A Cherokee Feast of Days, the first volume, and I was reading through that, and if you don't wonder if we're getting too involved in the technological age with our computers and our cell phones, and I know you're even on CD-ROM now with Think on These Things,
Yes.
but are we going too far with our high-tech society?
I think people are giving too much attention to the internet. I know the internet has a lot to offer, but it has a lot of drawbacks too. And people are going to have to use wisdom. And you cannot find wisdom on the internet. The wisdom is a inner thing. And when people get so involved with a computer, things are beginning to show up for pornography and people getting acquainted and doing crazy things just because they make an acquaintance on the computer. This is like opening up a door to backward.
Mm-hmm. We're losing our people skills instead of gaining them on
Yes.
one-on-one
Yes.
skills. As part of your Native American tradition, and I know it's very important to Native Americans, the nature and the involvement with nature, and I wonder if that might have been what led you to combine Native American wisdom, A Cherokee Feast of Days, with your traditional spiritual column. What gave you the idea of doing A Cherokee Feast of Days?
Well, it's a little bit like I had someone ask me after I started writing, and they began to be curious about who I was, and they said, "Did it surprise you when you found out you were Indian?" And I said, "No, it surprised me that you were not." And see, being Indian is all involving nature, everything in nature. The sky, the earth, the water, the trees, even the storms. You know, they're fascinating. To see the change in the movement and the color. People could gain so much if they'd turn off the television and look at the sky.
You have a beautiful meditation here in A Cherokee Feast of Days, the first volume for June the 2nd, and I wondered if I could get you to read that. And it talks about all the sounds of nature. June the 2nd.
June the 2nd. Late June evenings offer a variety of concerts to the lingering spirit of the Chalagi, the Cherokee. The songs of katydids and crickets rise to a crescendo and shrink back to the way a tide swells and recedes. A sudden volley of hoots shoot from the woods, and impatient shouts answer. The prairies lie quiet and serene, beneath faintly showing stars until coyotes, most likely only 2 or 3, but they howl like a dozen. The first high-pitched shout is like the head singer at a stomp dance, and then others join in before they stop as suddenly as they start. In the lull, the plaintive voice of the whippoorwill adds a sweet note. It has all been gona dif, a messenger or an ambassador of goodwill, of peace on earth, not only to the Chalagi, but from the Chalagi to all the world. June is Chalani, the green corn month, and that is Cherokee, the green corn month.
Can you explain a little bit about what Green Corn Month is?
That was a special time of fest where people did the green corn dance and all the dances. You know, I think it's so funny when the Indians danced. Preachers from way back used to tell them that was of the devil and they should not do that. And they didn't understand that it was worship. It was joyfulness, and it was worship of the one Spirit, the Holy Spirit. And now when I turn on television and I see Christian communities celebrating, and they're all jumping up and down and dancing, And I told Charlie, I said, look at that. And they told us they were savages for doing all that dancing.
When you were going back and writing a Cherokee Feast of Days, did you learn things about the Cherokees that you hadn't known simply because it was so familiar to you? Did you, in your research, learn a lot of interesting details, history that you had missed?
I have learned, but mostly I enjoy having it confirmed. Things that I knew and I didn't know for sure. Did this come through family that hearsay? And here it is, and it confirms what I had always thought, and that's gratifying to have something confirmed to you that you have always taken seriously.
Right, and obviously Cherokee Feast of Days has been very successful. Now Volume 2 is coming out. How does that feel? Are you excited?
Oh, of course I am. I'm excited because it was well received. The first volume was well received, and one of the nicest things that happened to me was a Cherokee, the Suetas in Georgia, ordered a copy of Cherokee Feast of Days for each family in their clan. And they said, we like what she says because if we could write, we would say what she says.
What a fine tribute.
And see, this to me, if your Indian brother agrees, you've hit a homer, in other words.
Well, let me ask you something. You're working on your daily column at the same time you're writing these books. Does that get confusing?
It doesn't get confusing, but your body gets weary. You have a lot, because see, a book is 365 pages of just text, besides all the other things that you have to bring in. And then you're writing 365 newspaper columns, so to speak, maybe not quite that many for a year.
Well, when you're writing a book, you eventually come to the end, and there's a sense of release and relief. But now with your column, there never is an end, is there? It's ongoing. Do you think you'll always be writing that column?
Yes, I will, as long as anybody wants to read it, because your mind keeps moving in, like, it reminds me of water or smoke or something. It keeps moving in all the crevices of life, searching out meanings and thoughts and color and emotions. And you want people to know they're not alone.
And do you think maybe your early background helps you in that way and wanting people to know they're not alone and to come forward? Because you had confided in me earlier, and of course I tell everybody that you were very shy in school, and you don't strike me as a shy person now. But are you still a shy person?
Well, yes, basically I am, but I find also as you get older, you get to the point where you care less about, you don't care whether you impress anybody or not. You just are, I'm me, and take it or leave it.
Any other type of writing you'd like to do? Of course, you have your Cherokee Feast of Days books, you have your column. Is there something that you've always wanted to write that you haven't?
I would like to write short stories that would have a definite pull to so many young people who have not formed any sort of spiritual lives at all. It's frightening to me that there's so many young people that have, now don't get me wrong, there are great numbers of young people who are receptive to spiritual things and are good people. But there are others who've never even heard of many things, never heard of how they can handle something. And they just, you know, they're like a firecracker. They're off in all directions.
So that's another possible project. Any others that you'd like to write?
I'd like to go home and sit in the garden.
Well, that sounds pretty entertaining, but you're not going to go sit in the garden. You're going to the ABA convention. And tell us a little bit about what the ABA convention is.
ABA convention is American Book Association. It's a huge affair, and this year, and I think it's going to be permanently in Chicago at the big mart there. And there's, the walls are lined with booths of people, dealers and writers and and all these people, and I'm going to autograph. I'm going to sign books up there.
I know you must enjoy visiting with people who read your books and are fans, but sometimes it's getting out and promoting your work hard too, not just because you're shy, but just from a time standpoint, is it difficult?
Yes, it's very, you know, when I started writing, of course I started this as a child, all I ever wanted to do was write. And I didn't dream that I would have to talk, I would have to speak, I would have to promote, I would have to sell. You have to let people know what you're doing and who you are to see if you're worthy of their time.
Is that harder now than it was 26 years ago when Think on These Things first came out? Has the market changed much over those years?
The market, it was just beginning to wake up at 26 years ago. I think that's one reason my first book was such a success, was that people think, why didn't I learn this sooner? Why didn't I know this? It was because we were standing in the dark back there. We didn't know these things. There was no one to teach us. And all of a sudden, the light's coming on.
Well,
and we're learning.
And we're learning, and you're certainly being very successful with Think on These Things, the column, a new volume of A Cherokee Feast of Days. Thank you, Joyce, for being here. Thank Charlie for us. Have the dogs sing another chorus of Star Spangled Banner.
I will.
Joyce Hifler. Thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.